Um, and formally welcome everybody. Thank you very much for taking the time to come and log into our event today. And I'll hand over straight away to the Chamber President, Colin Ahern, for a few words to open the session. Over to you, Colin.
Thanks, John. And before John introduces today's speaker, I just want to take the opportunity to welcome everyone today. It's a great turnout, not surprising considering the topic that we're going to be discussing. I'm lucky enough to be able to live and work in Kilkenny, and I want my children to have the same choice if they want to. And for that to happen, we need good planning and into the future, and that's what the City and County Development Plan is all about. So we're very appreciative to today's speakers for coming to have a chat with us today. And without further ado, I'll pass back over to John to get us started.
Thanks very much, Colin. And straight away, I will go to our speaker. We have one speaker today, who is Denis Malone, from the Senior Planner in the Forward Planning Department of the Kilkenny County Council. And Denis has very kindly put together some slides, which I will now bring up for you all to see. So welcome, Denis. I'd also like to welcome his colleagues, Nicholas Lowe and Naomi Scully, who are also from the Forward Planning Department. And perhaps they may engage depending on what questions and so on crop up in the Q&A session later on. So before I hand over to Denis now, I will just try to share the screens and hopefully you can tell me that that is now visible.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you see that, Denis?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll hand over to you, Denis. You take it from there.
Okay, well, thanks very much, John, and thanks for the invite to address the Chamber and give us an opportunity to give a little bit of an explanation around what the County Development Plan is about. I'm going to focus today a little bit around the economic development aspects of the plan, just given the audience. And I know some of you may have participated in some of the public events that we've done already around this. So we've had 4 open-ended sessions already, and economic development was one of those. So if there's duplication on some of that, and you've attended that already, so apologies for that. So it's trying to kind of balance the presentation towards today's audience, having I suppose regard that some of you are more familiar with the process than others. So I'm going to just need to move down that a bit. So in terms of just as I said, I've is that that's the first slide, John, is it? Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah.
So in terms of economic development and spatial planning, you know, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. So at national level, you'll see there's obviously national policy there in terms of economic and job creation. So people like the IDA and Enterprise Ireland have a significant role in that. And then at more at a local level, then KCC itself has its own economic, social and community stroke development role, and that's at the local level. And through that, then that's implemented in 2 main policy documents: the County Development Plan, which is the overriding spatial plan, and then some of you, or a lot of you, would have heard of the Local Economic and Community Plan, which is a side-by-side document and deals more on the community, softer community stuff, and then also on the actions around economics to achieve the spatial outcome. And KCC itself then gives this support through the local enterprise office, and also you know, it then through the LECP and through the development plan, the council sets out its own land and employment policies for its area, and that underpins the county's development. And just a little graphic there on the side, you'll see it's trying to give you, and now it's one that I borrowed from South Dublin County Council, but you can see there where it's a pyramid shape. So at national level, you have the national planning framework, the national development plan, which would set out a lot of the strategic issues in terms of economic investment and spatial planning. And then in the light blue section, you have that devolves down into the regional, at a regional level. So we have documents called the Regional Spatial Economic Strategy, and then that's set at a regional level. So we're in the southern region, which extends from Wexford to Kerry, and basically from Tipperary and Laois down to Waterford and so on. We're all in that. So, and then below that then is where we are. So that the green bit there is our local economic community plan and our development plan. And then you have below that again, you'd have local plans and area-based plans that we would prepare and involve through the local community. So that's the kind of structure. And you can see there where at national level, as you go up the pyramid, things are very much more strategic. And as you go down into the pyramid, things get into more detail. So we're doing strategic stuff for the county, and below that level at local area plan and area-based plans, you get into the more detail and more of the projects that would evolve out of the strategic issues. So you can move on there, John. So again, just a bit of a background on the economic side. KCC itself is a major contributor economically with a budget of about 90 million proposed for 2021, and that deals with a lot of infrastructural development and delivery of services. So all the stuff that the street cleaning, all that kind of stuff that goes on, and that's in that budget. And then you have the supports in the local economic office. So I'm sure a lot of the members will be familiar with Fiona Deegan and all that, and the work that she does in relation to supporting local enterprise, and that promotes entrepreneurship, foster business starts up, develops existing micro and small business to drive job creation, and provides accessible high quality supports for your business idea. So you move on, John. Yeah. So just to recap on how the integrating of spatial planning and economic development, economic and community development. So I mentioned that there's two plans. One is the county plan, and the other is the local economic and community plan. So both of them run on 6-year cycles, and the local economic and community plan is due to be reviewed again this year. So what you'll have is in a sequence, the spatial planning, and then evolving or complying with the spatial allocation will be the economic plan. So what do I mean by that? Well, so the spatial plan will identify the major areas for, say, employment and housing and so on. And then the local economic and community plan will bring forward the policies to achieve that in an economic sense. So like the supports for businesses and the actions around that in terms of grant assistance and all that kind of stuff. So the local economic and community plan will take account of the development plan and its core strategy. So you can move on, John. Yeah, please. And just to give you an example of what that means spatially. So on the left there, you'll see the map of the county, and you can see it has all the infrastructure on it. It has the national roads, it has the railway line, it has the motorway on it. And then around that, the two red dots are really the two major allocations for job creation. So if we're looking for people to invest into the county in a large sense, so foreign direct investment, or indeed, foreign investment from Ireland, if you like, the foreign in the councils outside of Kilkenny, these are the two areas that we've identified. Kilkenny City and Ferrybank Bellevue area is where we're seeking, if something major comes, this is where we want them to allocate. But we're not forgetting the rural area. We're still a very rural county. About over 50% of the population still lives in the rural areas. So you must take cognizance of that, and the business like in the district towns. So they all have their own allocations in terms of employment locations and so on. And then on the right there, you have what we call the core strategy for the city area. So that just identifies what we have, this 4 neighborhood model for the city. And you can see in the pink areas are the major employment locations. So you have up in the northwest there, you'd have like the hospital, St. Luke's Hospital, and there's some other employment locations. So there's like well over 1,000 people employed in the hospital alone. And then you have the Purses Inch area, Legas Rat, another significant employment base, and then Lochby would be the other major employment location where you'd have business parks, IDA, and private business parks there. So and then the 4 neighborhoods sitting around the city centre, and the city centre itself obviously having its own employment base as well and residential component. So move on, John, yeah, please. So in the plan itself, it's I'm going to focus on chapter 5 in the county plan, which is economic development. And the economic strategy really is a continuation. It's continued economic development is around, jobs is the focus. So if we're going to grow the population, which we're kind of mandated to do under the national planning framework, to 30,000 by 2040, which is quite achievable in my own view, you're going to have if that's we're at about 27,000 at the last census. So if that's at least another 3,000 people, so we're going to be looking for about an extra 1,500 jobs to support that population growth, and these are going to come from the various services areas that we've targeted here. So agriculture and food, which obviously as a rural county we're very strong in, with Glanbia being the major one there, and the likes of Red Mills and so on. So these are two large agricultural employers, and adding value to the agricultural produce from the county. You have the financial services, so we all know the tax bank, State Street, Banking 365, and then probably include IDA and so on, not IDA, sorry, BHI in that as well, with their call center. We have the technology side, manufacturing, creative industries, the likes of Cartoon Soon, that's well documented. And of course, tourism and hospitality is a major driver in the city and county. And I suppose one of the things then to complement all that is important in terms of underpinning, technology and change in terms of job change, I suppose, and moving to a technology-based economy would be the third and fourth level education. So there's a particular objective around that in the plan as well. So thanks, John. Move on. So just a brief summary of what would be in. So typically when you go to the planning, you'll see agriculture, there's lots of policy and objective in there around support and development of agriculture and food, but at the same time trying to protect the environment. And then financial services, to have a sufficient employment location suitable service within the city and the county. So for instance, the business parks at the edge of town, the Abbey Quarter, all these areas where potential jobs will come in, they need to be serviced and identified. Manufacturing, similar, the creative industries as well, then develop high quality tourism, leisure and complementary services. So not just around the city, we're all familiar with the medieval mile concept and all that, and the Butler Gallery recently opened, those type of things, and the festivals in the town. But you also, again, need to spread that around the county. So the likes of Castlecomer has its woods, has its Discovery Park, excuse me. In the Thomastown area, you have Woodstock and so on. So these are draws for tourism in the rural aspects of the area. And then a significant, and in fact, it's dealt with separately, significantly in chapter 5 is about the retail strategy. So I'll talk a bit about more that later. So thanks, John. And then just not to mention or not to forget the third level. So we have a particular objective in the plan there to secure the development of a third or fourth level campus or campuses in Kilkenny as part of the development of a technology university facility. So this is a long-standing objective, and in 2018 Colette Byrne, the chief executive, did launch a document about the case for third level in Kilkenny. So it's well documented, and in fact if you go to the university, the TUSE website, you'll see a commitment there to develop an element of that in Kilkenny. So the idea of having a TUSE with a campus in Wexford, a campus in Kilkenny, campus is obviously well established in Carlow and Waterford. So that's the concept around that, and I think it's well established at this stage, and that's progressing. I think the application for a TUSE is to be made soon enough, later this year, to formally get the thing off the ground. I think with a view to having it launched in January 2022, I believe. So next, John, yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about retail and it's what the strategy tries to do, and where retail is seen as appropriate in terms of scale and its location. So just the first thing to say is that I talked a little bit about core strategy, and what that does is identifies, the main areas of expansion in terms of population. So your retail strategy is aligned to that. So just to put it in a very basic way, if we're going to grow the city by 3,000, well, that's going to attract a certain amount of retail activity. So we're not going to be saying, well, we want to put, a major retail development out in, Thomastown that's going to take away from, the likes of the city. So it's all about appropriate scale. So that's what I mean by aligning to the core strategy. So the bulk of that will be Kilkenny City, and then to cater for that growth. And then there's also significant growth identified in Ferrybank, the Ferrybank area as part of the greater metropolitan area. So at the moment, we have a district centre identified there. And at the moment, the population around Ferrybank is about 7,000. And as the plan will evolve under the Waterford Metropolitan Area Plan, we would expect that the population of Ferrybank will probably double over the next 10 to 15 years. And that's what we're planning for. So you'll see Ferrybank be going up to about between 15 and 18,000 probably by 2040. So that would be a significant shift in population in the Waterford area. And then we have our district towns, as I mentioned, Thomastown, Castlecomer. So they all have their own local area plans, and opportunity sites will be identified in those for retailing. And a case in point actually is the recent grant of permission for an Aldi development in the centre of Castlecomer, so on the old creamery site, which should be a significant, in terms of job creation, first of all, and then a significant in terms of a draw into Castlecomer from the surrounding area. So if I'm currently living around Castlecomer, its retail offer is at the moment a Eurospar, and I think there's a Londis might be there as well. So you'll now have a significant input in a different offer in terms of the discounter there. So people that have to travel over to Carlow or into Kilkenny for a discounter will now be able to shop locally in the district. And that has developed also in Callan will be a similar situation happened again. Again, the local area plan identified the site, and that directed the investment towards that area. Excuse me. And then outside of that, you'll have other areas. So for instance, each of the neighbourhoods will have their own neighbourhood. So we have Lochby and we have New Park. And similarly, as the Brega Valley is rolled out, we'll expect to get a commercial development in there, and similarly up in Loch McCask. And I suppose an important thing just to consider, not only in retailing, but certainly in the retailing area, is the town centre first policy. So working from the core retail area outwards, and the core retail area being the first choice for development. Now, and that must be aligned with other policies such as heritage, traffic, and so on. So John, you can move on to the next one, please. And not undermining the challenges around that, or recognizing, I suppose, the challenges. Obviously, the impact of COVID-19 has been significant, both in retailing and in tourism around the city. And with the help of God, I suppose we'll all be be able to put it behind us eventually, but it has had a significant impact. And that's a picture I took on a Saturday morning in High Street, just after the first lockdown was announced or implemented there. I think it was March the 23rd. So I don't think you can see a single person in High Street in that picture. So that's the impact that obviously you're all well aware that the COVID has had. And then the other challenge, I suppose, and COVID has driven this a little bit extra, is the online retailing. And I know that the Enterprise Office ran a program around, getting smaller enterprises to be able to have an online presence and so on. So these are the kind of challenges. And what does that then pose for the city in terms of the future of the city centre? Like, I think retailing will come back in more like the traditional stuff, but like obviously there's an impact from this. So how do we counteract that shortfall in terms of what's happened with COVID, in terms of the people not coming to the city centre? And that's a significant challenge to address in the plan. And I think from our perspective at the moment would be obviously more residential in the city centre is obviously how to get that delivered is an issue. So next one, John, yeah. So one of the things around that then residential is about the idea of what we call placemaking. It's not a term, I suppose, that might be familiar to the public in general, but placemaking is about, you know, making nice places, really, to put it in a simple term. And it is you know, it's a multifaceted approach, and it's about improving and creating quality place. And I think it's something that in Kilkenny we're good at. We have a good track record, and it's in that. So, you know, one of the things that's noted about Kilkenny is its character of the high street and the other surrounding streets there, the buildings that are there, and that this you know, this placemaking, it's an interaction between people and the places they inhabit. So, and it's not a static thing, you know, it's something that evolves over time, and it's about achieving a high quality of life in the place and creating a sense of place and belonging. I think that's something that, you know, Kilkenny people will be quite proud of. Say, well, look, it's a nice place. And I think Colin just referred to it there as well in his introductory remarks. He has the pleasure of living and working in Kilkenny, and he wants his children to be able to live and work in Kilkenny. So it's that kind of sense of, you know, I love the place and I want, and I think all of us would be of that kind of view. So, and this is an important element also in attracting investment. So having a quality place to enjoy is something that attracts investment. And this is an underpinning or an underlining criteria that the IDA use when they're looking to attract foreign direct investment, is the quality of place and the quality of life that they can offer. So it's not something that something we've latched on to in particular, but it's true and well tested and tried in the international sphere, that people, particularly with moving investment, you know, that they can go anywhere. So that have an attractive place. Everyone can do the tax incentives and all that, but to top that off, then you have your quality spaces. So and how that's done, well, town centre improvement, make the town centre and the areas everywhere, not just the town centre, but make that more attractive, accessible to people by walking, cycling, more places to rest and relax in the public realm, Market Yard, Mayor's Walk, the Medieval Mile. And these are examples of placemaking and benefits that accrue to residents, workers and visitors alike. So yes, John, you move on there. So in placemaking, then what we want is to have a better placemaking will bring residents in the city. So this will, you know, in time counteract any offset in terms of or help to offset the impacts of COVID and the remote working that is coming into play now. So we'd have situations where even in the county council here, you know, we have a mixture of working arrangements going on. For instance, I'm in the office today, that's fine, but actually Nicholas and Naomi are working remotely. So they're not in Kilkenny. Nicholas is over in Carlow. And so it's that kind of drop off in activity that can be countered by more residential development in the city, along with, you know, obviously promoting stuff that the businesses that are there already, increasing that activity. And this, as I said, this will in turn, the extra resident will support more economic activity, which support demand in services in the city. So giving easy access to work within the city, better connectivity between the various uses. So just going back, if you just remember the picture you had there with the core strategy for the city and the employment locations on the edge. So if I'm living in the west of the city, let's say out in my new neighborhood in Brega Valley, you should be able to, or we need to be able to develop up a connection between them. So if I'm working over in the IDA business park, how do I get over there? Can I get over there in a sustainable way that I don't have to get into a car to drive around the city? I can get across the city and interact more with the uses along the way. So I think it's important that placemaking is not just about beautification. It's actually part of your economic strategy. So that's what I'm saying there in that slide. The next, John. So all of this then would we'd hope lead to a self-sustaining and growing urban centre as in Kilkenny, and indeed the same principles applied to the likes of Thomastown or Callan or Castlecombe or Graiguenamanagh, whichever are district towns. But that Kilkenny then would be, enhanced in its role as a regional growth centre of scale, So what I mean by that, at a regional level, I think we're the fourth. I'm just trying to remember. There's certainly within the southern region. So in the southern region I talked about, from Wexford to Kerry, and from Tipperary, Clare down to Cork and Waterford, we're the fourth largest urban settlement. So after the three cities of Limerick, Waterford, and Cork, we're the next largest. At least that was at the last census, and I don't think that would change. So it's to be able to keep that center of growth, or that scale, and as a regional contributor to growth, or contributor to regional growth, I should say. So that drives growth in the city and in the county, and it helps to drive growth in the region as well, in combination with Waterford City, Wexford, Carlow, and Clonmel. So they'll be the other major centres there. So yeah, John, next one, please. So just to give you a bit of a direction as to, well, how do I interact and how do I make my views heard? So we have, we're in the middle of the public consultation exercise. Our closing date is the 12th of March. So these webinars and interactions are part of that strategy. I suppose we've had four public ones. We've also met people like Coral Minogue. We'll be doing something with the various political groupings as well. That's ongoing. We've done the age-friendly people as well. We've interacted with the age-friendly. The PPN network have also been involved. So, and yourselves as the chamber, or this is one of the road shows we're doing. So you can see there on screen we have consult.kilkenny.ie. So that's our main interactive portal, and that's where you can go on and you can log on there and actually post up a submission online. Or you can email it directly to ourplan@kilkennycoco.ie, or you can send it in by traditional post, just in an envelope, draft city and county development plan, planning department, and that'll get us there. I suppose it's just, I would encourage you, whatever views that you have, is to make them known, no matter how trivial you think they are. And so what happens, the submissions, they're brought to, they're compiled into a chief executive's report. So Colette will sign off on a report, which will summarize the issue, make a recommendation around it, whether to change the plan or not. And then that'll all go back to the councillors, to a full council meeting for consideration. And if there's changes, which I think there will be, invariably there's changes to something so big and complicated, those changes go back out for public display again for another 4 weeks later on in the early summer period, with the intention then to have a final plan adopted in or about the end of June, or it'll probably, I'm sure, like go into July, I would think anyway. So that's our time frame on it. So next slide, I think it's the last one, John, is it? Yeah, that's the last one. So that's about a bit of a whirlwind tour of what a development plan is about, and that's, so I'll just open it for comment or to the floor or questions or whatever. And thanks very much for listening.
Denis, thanks very much indeed for that very comprehensive overview of the economic aspects, and there's a huge amount of content there, and very appropriate that you finished up with the last slide, which was the reach out essentially to everybody on the call here and everybody in Kilkenny, that you are looking for people's views, you're looking for input. And it's not necessarily just to identify things that are wrong or things that are missing, even if there's things in it that you feel wholeheartedly about, that they're very good, then the County Council Planning Department would like to hear that too, so that at least they know they're on the right track with certain aspects and so on. So so yeah, that piece then brings me back to what I said at the outset. We'd welcome your questions. So if you want to type them into the chat function, and indeed, if there aren't too many of them, I'm more than happy to hear people actually verbalize them. So, the only reason for staying on mute is just so that we don't clog up the airwaves as such. So if you want to put your hand up, there's a function there in the to do so, and I'll try and watch out. There's a lot of you there, so I mightn't see them all. So do feel free to do that. There's one thing that I would ask myself, Dennis, if I could, and it was all in relation to the placemaking concept, and the kind of a domino effect that it has. So you make here a better place. Then that leads to more residents wanting to live here because it's so much nicer. That'll lead to more jobs and extra economic activity, which is good for the city, it's good for the county, it's good for the region. So you have that domino effect, and ultimately it seems to become very important that there's a certain cohesion or cohesiveness and collaboration between the different counties within the region. And I'm just wondering if you have a view about, is there actually that cohesiveness and collaboration going on within the region between the different county councils and local authorities that are in the southeast, or how are we fixed in that general space?
I suppose, yeah, there is cooperation goes on, obviously, and at a regional level. So, for instance, the chief executives I know meet on a regular basis, and so, but at the same time, there's always healthy competition between individual counties. So obviously, you're trying to do your own patch as best you can, and at the same time, there would be regional issues that would be, of importance to the region. So, for instance, an example of that would be the proposed N24 route from Waterford to Limerick, and so that connectivity is seen as important for the region. So all the chief executives, so particularly Tipperary and Waterford and ourselves, will see that as an important connectivity. So being able to connect the, Limerick and Waterford and into Cork and so on. So that'll be a kind of a simple example of how the chief executives, would coordinate their thing, but their objectives. So, but at the same time, there is competition between between them, and probably that's probably a healthy thing too, in the sense that we're all trying to do our best for our own county. So probably an example of that might be, there might be a little bit of envy, in Kilkenny on the basis of Waterford and its greenway, for instance. And we're developing a greenway from New Kilkenny in Kilkenny, but from New Ross to Waterford City, and link up with the Waterford Greenway to Dungarvan. So, not to put too much of a final point, but certainly, even the naming of that became a problem because, Waterford and the other counties didn't want it called the Kilkenny Greenway because so it was more a southeast. So the compromise was to be the southeast Greenway in County Kilkenny. So you can have little differences like that. But in general, all I would say is that the chief executives would have their eye on the significant challenges. So, for instance, another one would be the ports, development of ports, for instance, at Bellevue and Rosslare, and the potential there, given so for instance, the impact of Brexit, and what has that done in terms of direct shipping routes. So now that the land bridge through the UK is problematic. And you can see where there is investment coming in Rosslare now as a direct route, but that will also impact on Waterford as well. So to be able to, to identify these issues and to each local authority support that. So, for instance, there is a review, I think, of the National Development Plan expenditure going on at the moment. And so one of the things, like I mentioned, the N24, but obviously the investment in the ports then in the southeast being the closest link to the continent. So to push that in terms of National Development Plan investment, that we need that investment in both Rosslare and in Bellevue to make that connection to accommodate businesses so that they can get their produce across to the continent quickly and not having to go through the UK as a land bridge, and that the problem that caused. So that's the kind of That's, I suppose, where those kind of issues would come to the fore. And as I know that the chief executive do meet on a regular basis to take those things. So, but there's also always healthy competition in the background.
Perfect, great. Thanks for that, Dennis. And I see we have a question. There's one or two questions coming in now. We have one from Leslie. What type of retail mix is being considered for the Brega Valley? Can you give us an idea on that, Dennis?
Yeah, so we're not prescriptive, but for Brega Valley, it'll serve a population of about 3,000 households when it's complete. So typically, what you'll have is it'll be some kind of a general supermarket, the likes of a Super Value or a Centra or maybe a discounter serving that with a mixture of other smaller. So typically, something like Lockby or New Park Shopping Centre would be what you'd envisage there. So, a modest, I wouldn't say modest, but a medium-sized supermarket to serve the catchment, the walking catchment, and then with other services such as maybe dry cleaners, chemists, whatever, that would go along with that.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Another question then, when should we expect to see any type of specificity entering into the plan? And how will we be able to see and have the ability to comment on the changes in specificity over time?
So I can't even pronounce that, specificity. So I take it that means in particular objectives or specific objectives. Is that what the question is about?
Yes, I think that, rather than the overarching plan where we can see, and you've outlined the overall direction of it, breaking that down into specific elements.
Yeah. So what you'll find is that in the plan, while it is overarching, there will be some objectives pulled out in each section. So if you look at a typical section, you'll see, the policy written out, and then at the end, you'll see some particular objectives. So for instance, the transport would be a good one to look at for the city. So you'll see talks about modal shift and all that kind of stuff. So you'll see a couple of objectives there about implementing cycle lanes, implementing better transport, and a number of road objectives and so on. So that's where you'll see. But just be mindful that the plan isn't about listing every single project that's going to happen over the next 5 years, because as things naturally progress, people come up with different ideas. So the point about it is to set up a policy framework that allows development to come forward that will achieve those high level goals that you want. So if it's so for instance, as going back over the years, looking at the examples of that might be, to give an example, might be a good idea. So, the idea that say St. Mary's Hall would be turned into the Medieval Mile Museum. So that wasn't a project in the last, when that was mooted. So what we had was, we had a development plan saying that we wanted, tourism to be enhanced, and then we'd have other policies around reuse of historic buildings, all that kind of stuff. So when someone thought of the idea of coming up with changing the policy framework was there, and then that was able to be brought forward as a project, and then the plan was able to support that. So hence we got the funding and all that kind of. So in a 6-year period, you won't think of every single project that you want to implement. There will be projects that will come forward, and it's important that your plan is based around those high level objectives that you want to achieve. So whether it's place making or connectivity. So the fact that there's such an emphasis now on connectivity and sustainable transport is going to allow projects to come forward that will implement things like cycle lanes and pedestrian connectivity. So if you're putting forward a project for funding, say from TII, that you'll be able to point to these objectives, that we've agreed this strategy forward, and this is a project that will underpin that and help to deliver that concept. So I don't know if that explains it.
Okay, yeah, thanks very much for that, Dennis. Okay, there's another question that just come in here. We've a lot of empty shop premises before COVID. Is there anything going to be any consideration to getting these repurposed as working spaces or residential, sorry, it's moving, residential spaces? Will there be a look at the modernisation of the look of the city with steel and granite over iron and limestone? Should we look at the other medieval cities to model on instead of looking similar to other cities? If you want to enhance the tourist offering and making our city look its best, your placemaking idea needs to consider pride in place. There's a lot in that now, but would you have a comment to make there, Dennis?
Well, as a start, I suppose the repurposing of empty shops or empty premises around, that's something that we would certainly encourage. I suppose each property owner has an economic choice to make in that, and what I mean by that is, there are challenges around converting existing properties, particularly in a medieval city, and like fire regulation. So if you're going to have a premises and you want to divide it into separate apartments and so on, there's things like the fire separation of individual units that comes into play, and that is a challenge. Also, like in terms of ground floor uses, there is exemptions there around that. So if so a shop can be converted into a residential uses without the necessary requirement of planning, and that's an exemption that was brought in a couple of years ago. So there are vehicles there, and it's something that we would certainly encourage and would actively assist owners in trying to do. But once you go into the upper floors, that is a challenge. I recognize that, and it's not an easy challenge. And there's work continuously going on in the background around that. There's a national review of that happening as well. So in other words, a recognition. You might have seen, I don't know if anyone watched the EcoEye program last Tuesday, and Duncan Stewart was on there. So they looked at Cork in particular, where the challenges around that of converting buildings into use, and the idea of fixing those challenges. So obviously, if you're converting an old building and a fire does happen, you want everyone to be protected. So that definitely is a challenge. But and there's an economic issue there in terms of people have been able to do that. So what I would point to is, for instance, there is the Living City initiative, which is something where people can put the refurbishment of their properties in the historic areas. So we have two of those areas in Kilkenny City. We basically left and right of the River Nore. Both sides have a significant area there, so people can avail of tax reliefs on the investment there. So we've only had about 11, it might be slightly higher than that, but last time I checked, it was 11 such properties had availed of that. And that any kind of refurbishment can go against your tax on that. So those kind of incentives are important, and that's something, of course, the council doesn't have a control under, but it is, and that has a limited time frame, and it was extended up until 2023, I think, and hopefully it will be extended again to allow that to happen. So yeah, on the public realm stuff, on the modern, so again, without being, the plan won't be specific around materials, for particular projects. So usually, for instance, what you'll find is that each project will have its own consent process. So I'll go back to, for instance, a nice controversial one was the parade. And people like still, I suppose, so just in terms of the steel and so on, that was referenced in the thing. So that process went through its own, that project went through its own process of debate and interaction with the public and decision eventually by the elected members. So the fine details of those sort of things are, in terms of public realm projects, are dealt with at that level. And then so if you get, for instance, a planning application then from a private individual, that has its own process as well. And there isn't, I agree with the sentiment of not looking like, other towns and being familiar with having your own distinctive style. And, I think that's important, but it's very much project based. And what I'll go back to say is, when I was talking about the placemaking, placemaking is about incremental additions in terms of a place like Kilkenny. So if in the city here, so as things advance and you get your different projects come through, that's when the ideas around the materials used in the project will be teased out at that level. So
Right.
I think there are policies in the plan that cover that. But if people, what for instance, if you're concerned around that, it might be useful to make a suggestion around, what are the issues there in terms of making the place looking a bit different than other towns that follow a generic materials. So, and that would be something that we could look at in terms of policy, writing in a policy.
That's an open invitation to make a submission with those
absolutely,
ideas. Yeah, very good. And I see the chat function is getting quite busy, so I'll try and put two of the questions together here. One from Patsy Cummins: with all the extra investment and population growth and so on, what is being done to provide public amenities, especially sports facilities, for an already struggling cohort? And there's a second question kind of aligned in the same space. Whilst there will be a considerable increase in housing, retail and work on infrastructure, when will there be recreation stroke sports facilities provided for the growing population, as I don't see it in the plan? There is currently a huge shortage of facilities as it is. There are currently a lot of sports, minority, disabled, women in sport, that don't have a facility to play sports. Can this be included stroke revised? This will also bring tourism and visitors to the city. Would you like to give a few words on that, Denis?
Yeah, so I'd acknowledge, all right, that there's always a demand for recreational facilities and recreational sports and clubs, and there are several clubs in the city looking for facilities. And I'd have those examples of that, I suppose, where not exemplary examples, but some examples where I would have said that shouldn't have happened. So for instance, if the likes of Evergreen Soccer Club or St. Patrick's, GA, the village, decamping out of the city and moving out to the countryside, it just makes it inaccessible then for a lot of people. Those sort of things really shouldn't be happening. So there is definitely, so when we're doing our local area plans, and if just point to the Brega Valley, we certainly take into account recreational as in passive or non-sectoral recreation. So if you look at those plans, you'll have plenty of spaces identified to make the public park and so on. So for instance, in the Brega Valley Park, Brega Valley area, there's two types. There's the Brega Valley itself. We have a linear park along there, but we also have identified an area of about, I think it's 7 hectares roughly of a public park. So within that, there'll be an opportunity to provide playing fields and that the like of that, and that will be has to be delivered in some way in tandem with our housing. So and that's an ongoing process. So it's a matter of being able to coalesce, I suppose, with the various organizations and get the funding either through the organization itself and the council tapping into funding streams from the government. So you'd have the ORIS funding and the urban regeneration funding, that kind of stuff. And how is that? And it's important, I suppose, in the plan sense to have those kind of overarching, as I keep going back to the overarching objectives, that once you can show these kind of facilities are plan led, there's a good chance you will get funding for them. So I know that probably doesn't answer the question fully, but it's certainly something we're aware of. So for instance, one of the things that we're looking at in the next 12 months is to do 2 master plans in the city, one around the Fair Green and one around St. Canice's campus, or St. Canice's Hospital. And there's definitely potential in those 2 areas to look at significant recreational facilities in those, particularly on the St. Canice's side. But it's important that facilities, just give me a second, I want to close the blind in the windows in the eyesight.
And while Denis is
thanks for that. No, that was quick. I'm all right. So
work away, Denis.
So in that, it's important that the facilities in these areas then are open to the public in a sense. So while we've no issue with particular bodies or particular clubs or organizations using them, it's important that these are open to the widest possible cohort. And I suppose a good example of that would be recreational facilities in the schools. So the likes of the AstroTurf pitches and the gyms and so on, and these are rented out. So there's certainly, I know a lot of that goes on already, but it's something that we're aware of in terms of the recreational requirements. And I suppose in terms of just having a long-term strategy, so it's a point, it's a good point made, well made, that the recreational requirements of the city for 20 years. So if we're going to be looking at another 3,000 to 5,000 people maybe by 2040, well, there is going to be an impact on the recreational requirements, and that's something that I think the council should be looking at to try and acquire a land bank around that in a suitable location. So but the plan does recognize that it doesn't have a particular detail or objective to do X, Y, or Z in a particular area, but that will evolve over time as the pressures come, I think.
And again, I suppose, Denis, in that context, this is the opportunity for people who have ideas and suggestions as to what maybe the council should be doing in that space, that they can, make submissions along those lines.
No, absolutely. It's important that these things are flagged up, through the process. Obviously there's an awareness internally in here, that we're thinking about these things, but it's important that it's aired in a public forum as well. So bringing those submissions forward and having them discussed at the council chamber is the ideal way to bring it to a focus and bring it to some kind of pressure for more action.
Great. I'm very conscious now that we're coming to our time limit, and I did promise to have everybody out of here and finished by kind of the 2 o'clock mark. So I think whilst there are 1 or 2 more questions, we might just pass them on to Denis to be considered separately later, and we'll try and email the people who've made them. But before closing off, again, I'd just like to thank Denis for fielding those questions, and just to point to a point of information that's been put into the chat box there by Nicholas. If you Google consult.kilkenny.ie, it will give you a link to the council's consultation website. You can access the plan under the heading Consultations, and you can read the plan in PDF or section by section and make submissions on the site. So it's all quite user friendly there and is available to everybody. So we'd encourage you to go and look there at consult.kilkenny.ie. And also, as Denis had on his last slide, you can email in or just simply write it down on a letter and post it into the County Council in John Street. So that more or less brings our session to an end. What I'll ask now is our President, Chamber President Colin Ahern, to just close the session for us, please. Colin, over to you.
Thanks, John, and thanks to Denis, Naomi, and Nicholas. Look, if you haven't been on the consult.kilkenny website to look at the plan yet, it's something you should do. It's a very cool interactive map that brings you around it, makes it interesting, and breaks it down into areas that may or may not be of interest to you. So, in terms of heritage, economy, environment, planning, or housing, or whatever the case might be. And so it breaks it down into bite-sized pieces so that you're not looking at a huge document and hundreds of pages. And so it's certainly well worth doing, and would be worth some of your time. In terms of the submissions, the Kilkenny Chamber will absolutely be putting a submission in on behalf of its members. And we were waiting until after today's meeting before we did that. And I would hope that if any of you have any suggestions or ideas for that submission, that you would pass them directly on to John and Roisin in the Chamber for us to consider. And we'll be putting in our submission before the 12th of March. And indeed, there were so many questions there today, and I'm sure you can all see how we all think, and we all think differently in so many ways, and things are more important to people than other people. So it's really important that if you feel strongly about something, in a negative or indeed in a positive way, that you put your own submission in, and you have until the 12th of March to do so. It would be a shame if there was a part of the plan that you felt very strongly about, but a number of other people didn't feel as strongly about it, or felt negatively about it, and it was taken out because they took the time to put in their submissions and you didn't. So look, we have an opportunity every 6 or 7 years to do this, so it's important that we take the time to do it now. Just in terms of the chamber, we're going to continue doing what we're doing for the next number of months, and supporting local business and lobbying and having webinars and meetings like this. In particular, just draw your attention to one that's coming up very shortly. In 2 weeks' time, we have a chamber chat, which we have one of our members, Reg Fiddle, is providing a free leadership training event from his company, Preferred Future Leadership Coaching, and that'll be really interesting. So if you have the time, please make it for Reg's presentation. Other than that, I'd like to thank the huge amount of people that turned up today. We had 40 people at one point in the room, and just goes to show the interest there is in the subject. Just stay safe. Thanks for turning up, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks' time.